Hey, if you work in a company, in a team, in a company, and you are at least a mid-level developer, then once in a while your team will ask you to interview new people who would like to join the team. So you will be the interviewer. I play this role a few times a week, that's for sure. And there is a problem with the interviews when you are an active interviewer. Actually, the problem is even bigger when you are not a very active interviewer. The problem is, how do you explain your opinion about the person you interview to the rest of the team? They will give you the programmer, they will ask you to interview that guy, and then after the interview they will ask you what do you think, and you have to explain your conclusions, you have to summarize your experience after the interview. And what's more interesting is that they will sometimes ask you to give that summary after a while. They will ask you right after the interview, but maybe after a while as well, maybe in a few weeks even. And it's hard. It's hard to remember the people you interview. It's hard to remember why you give the opinion. So I share my recipe, how I do it. I designed a very small file for myself, a very small template of the most important questions I ask people who I interview. And they're not technical questions. I don't really specify the exact Java questions I may ask, but I broke down all the aspects of questions I asked that guy, and then I approximately defined the ranges in which I measure the answers I hear. For example, I pay attention to the open source history of the people who I interview. So it does matter for me. When you come to me for the interview, I will ask you, what's your experience in open source? Did you try to commit to some open source projects, or maybe you have your own open source projects? That kind of questions. If your answer is 0, I have nothing, then I give you 0 in this particular line. If you tell me that you are an active contributor to a few large open source products and you have your own stuff, then I will give you 7, 10. My range is from 0 to 10. And then I quickly, in just one sentence, explain to myself why I gave you that remark, why I gave you 5. I just put a few words there to remember. And I have other things like education. I pay attention to where you graduated. One thing is your bachelor or maybe no education in no university, or maybe you get a PhD in Stanford. So on the range from 0 to 10, I will give you the mark and I'll put some words there. Another thing I pay attention to is I usually give to Java programmers or Ruby programmers and to C++ programmers, I give a very small piece of code and I ask the people I interview to find bugs, to find problems in this piece of code. And according to their answers, I make my judgment during the interview how good or bad they are. And sometimes it's not about good or bad, actually often it's not about good or bad, it's about what kind of bugs they find. Some people see low-level problems there. Some people see high-level bugs, design problems there. So it's not about actually judging on your level, but about judging what you pay attention to. Like, what are you, a designer, or you're the programmer, or maybe the architect? So I write down my judgment, I write down my conclusions, and I give you the number from 0 to 10. Then I fill up this form. It's a simple one-page document. I put some details there, the date of the interview, what kind of general information I received from you. Very short, very brief. And I put this document to my computer. And I have these documents for the last years. I can go back a few years back and I can open, if you, for example, I interviewed you a few years ago, you come back to me again, then I open the file and I know what kind of questions I was asking you, what kind of answers I got, and why I decided that your level is 5 here, 3 here, 7 there, and so on and so forth. I suggest you do the same. Define for yourself the things you pay attention to. Define the ranges, define the way you measure the answers. And make this template the same for everybody you interview. And don't expect your company or your team to provide this template to you. Sometimes they would. The large companies, they usually expect you to somehow structure the result of the interview, somehow structure your conclusion. But I would suggest to still do your own work and define your own template, your own way of how you interview people, what you pay attention to. And stick to this template through the years of interviews you do. In this case, it will be easier for you to compare a candidate to candidate because you can see the numbers. Even though people are different, of course, it's hard to compare them by the numbers, but still, you will be able to explain to your team why this candidate is a go for you and this one is no go. So this explanation will be based on some objective information, objective measurements. Of course, they're not really objective, but still it's better than two subjective opinions. I like this guy, I don't like this guy. It's hard to explain to the management. It kind of feels like you're not really professional. But if you have a document for this one and a document for that one, very short, still it's better to explain your decision. That's my recipe. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.